And welcome back to another episode of Listen and Learn with Sudbury District Restorative Justice. My name is MJ, and today we're going to be talking about trauma informed facilitation. Now, before I get into that, I wanted to talk about the correlation between trauma informed facilitation and restorative justice as it pertains to us here at SDRJ. So, as most of you know by now, restorative justice is fundamentally about repairing harm. But the process of bringing together individuals affected by conflict can sometimes be emotionally volatile. At SDRJ, our programming addresses this by grounding our work in a trauma informed approach to care. We recognize that the majority of justice involved youth have experienced trauma of some degree, and our agency understands that behaviors like defensiveness or withdrawal are often survival responses rather than willful malice. Therefore, at SDRJ, we train our facilitators not just in conferencing skills, but in understanding the actual neurobiology of trauma and how to promote things like safety, regulation, and empowerment for all of our participants. By prioritizing the avoidance of re traumatization and by providing a secure, predictable environment, we ensure that restorative justice's core goals, genuine accountability, victim voice, and meaningful repair, are achieved through a process that is both compassionate and healing. Without any further ado, let's get into it. Today, we're talking about trauma informed facilitation. So sit back, relax, and let's get into it. What is trauma informed facilitation? Trauma informed facilitation is a specialized approach to leading groups, meetings, and dialogues, such as those that we use in restorative justice, that fundamentally shifts the focus from a judging behavior to understanding its origins in trauma. This framework acknowledges that the vast majority of people involved in conflict, whether as a victim or a survivor, or as the people who have caused the harm, have a history of trauma. Instead of asking, "What's wrong with this person?" a trauma informed facilitator instead will ask, "What happened to this person?" This perspective change is critical because trauma affects the brain's ability to regulate emotions, trust others, and process information, oftentimes manifesting as challenging behaviors like emotional outbursts, withdrawal, or sometimes defensiveness. These are actually adaptive survival responses that we've talked about before. They're commonly known as the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn responses. The overarching goal of trauma informed facilitation is to avoid re traumatization, which is the act of unintentionally creating a painful dynamic of past trauma, while at the same time creating a safe space for genuine healing and repair. General idea about what trauma informed facilitation is, we're going to move along and start talking about the core principles of trauma informed facilitation. And later on, we're going to talk about these principles in action. Effective trauma informed facilitation is built upon several guiding principles that must be woven into the fabric of the process. The first principle is safety. Now, this is physical and emotional. This is our foundation. Facilitators ensure the physical environment is non threatening and clearly establish and enforce behavioral guidelines. Emotionally, they'll work to minimize surprise and promote predictability by clearly outlining the process step by step. The second is trustworthiness and transparency. The facilitator is consistent, reliable, and honest about their role and the limits of confidentiality. This helps build trust, which is often severely compromised by trauma. For instance, the facilitator might state, "We will pause after every 20 minutes for a break, and you always have the right to request a pause or to simply leave the room if you need to." The next is empowerment and choice. A core experience of trauma is a loss of control. The facilitator actively works to give participants a voice and a choice. They might ask, "How would you prefer to receive that information?" Or, "Would you like to speak first? Or would you prefer I summarize what you shared with me?" This restores personal agency. And finally, collaboration and mutuality. The process avoids hierarchical power structures. The facilitator is not a judge or an expert imposing solutions, but rather a partner working with the participants to design the path forward. Decisions about the format, pacing, and outcomes are all made collectively. Now, as I mentioned just a few moments before, I wanted to talk about some examples of trauma informed practices in restorative justice. Applying this approach requires specific, sensitive practices, particularly in high stakes restorative dialogue. So let's start with pacing and regulation. A trauma informed facilitator is keenly aware of a participant's state of arousal. If a participant becomes highly agitated or shuts down completely, which can be signs of being triggered, the facilitator can immediately intervene not by pushing for more information, but by instead helping them regulate their nervous system. For example, a facilitator might calmly say, I see this as a very difficult moment for you. Let's take a pause. Can you feel your feet on the floor? Let's take 3 slow, deep breaths together. The conversation doesn't resume until the participant is visibly calmer and ready to re-engage. The next is language and reframing. The language used must be precise and non blaming, focusing instead on the impact of actions rather than moral judgment. For example, instead of asking an offender, why did you do such a terrible thing, which can evoke feelings of defensiveness or shame, the facilitator might ask, can you help us understand the circumstances that led to the harm? Or what do you understand to be the impact of your actions on the person across from you? This opens the door for empathy and responsibility. The next is safety and structure. The meeting environment and procedure must prioritize feeling secure over achieving a quick outcome. For example, before a victim offender dialogue, facilitators can conduct extensive pre conferencing to ensure the survivor feels emotionally prepared and has pre written questions or statements if necessary. During the meetings, chairs are positioned to allow participants an easy exit, and the facilitator sits close enough to physically intervene if necessary, though rare, or to offer immediate support, making the space feel safe and predictable. The ultimate measure of success is not whether an agreement is reached, but whether the process itself was conducted safely and respectfully. And that brings us to the end of today's episode of Listen and Learn with Sudbury District Restorative Justice. If you liked this episode, go ahead and click on the playlist on your screen to listen to some of our other episodes that we've uploaded here. And don't forget to visit our YouTube channel to listen to uploaded episodes of our podcast, The Circle, if you like this content. You also can find us online everywhere at RJ Sudbury or at our home on the web, www.sdrj.ca. Until next time.